Okay, now it is working. Okay, now it is working. Sorry everyone for these technical difficulties, but thank you for joining in. This is another CMS Policy Speaker Series. As I mentioned, today we're going to be hearing from Frances Roland. She's a senior associate at RMI. While we get her to come back in and she can share the screen, I'm just going to go over some important announcements. We haven't met and we haven't had a seminar in a while. So we have a lot of things that are happening with our CMS initiative. So I just want to go over some of them. But before that, just to mention, today we're going to be talking about this climate intelligence for the oil and gas sector. And I want to mention for those that don't know, like this kind of like effort with RMI started a couple of years ago, and at that time, with Frances and Deborah Gordon, they were at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and they were developing this OCI Web Tool that you're going to be hearing today. And they were using some of the CMS data sets. And here I highlight some of the CMS archive products that we have that can be used for oil and gas monitoring. The one on the left from Chris Elbich, Global Gas Flare Survey, using VIIRS night fire data, and also this other one by Daniel Jacob at Harvard University on the global inventory of methane emissions from fuel exploitation. And as like those, we have other CMS data sets available that can be used for oil and gas applications. As always, if you want to know more about the initiative, you want to know more about the projects, we have 17 new projects that were funded late last year. If you want to know, what are going to be the events that are happening within our initiative, you can go to our website, carbon.nasa.gov. Some of those announcements that are important: our CMS Phase 2 synthesis report was just published in June, and you can access that report in our website, going again, carbon.nasa.gov. For those of you interested in AGU, we have carbon monitoring system research and applications session that is going to be happening in AGU this December in Chicago. And important today, as you might know, today is the deadline for submitting abstracts, but for this session, we have until August 17 to submit abstracts. So just if you're interested, or let a colleague know that they have until August 17 for this specific session of CMS in AU. And two more announcements. One, we have the call for proposals for CMS. The proposal due date was extended to October 28, 2022. You can find more information about that call for proposals also on the website. And finally, we have our annual CMS Science Team meeting and stakeholder workshop coming up in less than 2 months. It's going to be hybrid. We're going to have a part that is going to be in person in the AU headquarters building here in Washington, D.C. So that's going to be happening September 26th to the 28th. The registration is going to be opening on August 17th. And you're going to be hearing more from that by email, or you can access the website and we'll have all the information there. The last thing, I just want to take your attention to this ongoing call for papers for the ERL, a special session on carbon monitoring system. So if you are thinking about publishing a paper related to some of the topics that you can see there, please consider this special issue on ERL. So now I see that we have Fran back again. We're gonna go with her presentation. She's gonna be talking about this OCI plus web tool and climate intelligence for the petroleum sector, and then we're gonna have like 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A and discussion after her presentation. So let me stop sharing my screen, and Fran, I think you now should be able to share the screen.
Thanks, Adil. I'm gonna finger cross that this works. Why am I getting a deny?
We can wait here. Like, I think if you can send me the slides, I can share my screen and share them.
Adil, I'm thinking I tried to come in via the application, but it wouldn't open. It just made me come in via the browser.
Okay.
Part of what I was going to do was show a 5-minute intro video, which really explains sort of the motivations and the key findings behind the OCI project. Would you like to share that screen, Adil, while I come in and get the slides up?
Of course.
Okay, that would be great.
I
And again, I apologize.
Yeah,
I will put
the link.
The link in the chat. Okay, I just sent that video.
Okay.
And I'm going to try to come back via the app because I know I'll be able to share my screen that way.
Global temperatures are due to overshoot the climate targets that scientists and policymakers have set to save the planet. As the Earth continues to heat up, emissions from oil and gas are not being reduced in line with climate goals. To achieve climate stability, the energy sector must transition to non-emitting sources, like renewable energy. We can't switch overnight, though. The oil and gas industry is complex. All sectors of the economy, assets shift globally, and finished products fan out to all sectors, both for energy.
Adil, you can't mute yourself because we can't hear the video.
Global temperatures are due to overshoot the
Some are
climate.
solid like peanut butter, others are like nail polish remover, and still others are more conventional. Some of these emit far more methane and carbon dioxide than others, and the climate risks are greater for some oils and gases than others. Climate footprints vary by at least a factor of 10, depending on different resource characteristics and the rates of being produced. This presents an enormous opportunity to harness data and enhance transparency to choose smart oil and gas reduction plans. The Global Intelligence Program at RMI created the Oil Climate Index Plus Gas Web Tool, known as OCI Plus, to quantify the differences in oil and gas climate footprints. The OCI Plus is a unique open source web tool. It provides independent analysis with advanced models and satellite data to estimate greenhouse gas emissions through the oil and gas supply chain, from extraction through end-use consumption. The OCI Plus project assesses the climate impacts from the majority of global oil and gas production, using data from hundreds of oil and gas fields around the world. When it comes to climate risks, there is no standard oil or gas due to their wide-ranging climate footprints. While emissions differences between oil and gas assets are big enough to matter, accounting for these differences is currently inadequate. For example, the U.S. government's emissions factors for oil and gas significantly undercount the total emissions from this critical sector. The blue bars in the chart represent the resources currently modeled in the OCI Plus project. Most of them are above regulators' prescribed emissions factors, which are represented by the dashed lines on the chart. This means that decision makers are systematically undercounting emissions from oil and gas supply chains. The OCI Plus improves oil and gas emissions transparency, accounting, and comparability by providing field-level emission intensity estimates. Climate actions can target the dirtiest resources first. The OCI Plus also takes a hard look at methane, the main component in natural gas and light oils. Methane is a potent pollutant that calls for increased focus, especially in the oil and gas sector. Methane persists in the atmosphere for a decade, heating the planet and polluting the air. Compared to the equivalent amount of carbon dioxide, methane warms the planet over 80 times more powerfully over a 20-year time frame. Decisive action is needed by responsible parties, and the OCI Plus helps decision makers get there. For example, if a carbon tax or methane fee is imposed on the oil and gas industry, the OCI Plus specifies where in the supply chain emissions occur and who is responsible. The Web Tool breaks down emissions from each actor: producers, refiners, shippers, and end-use consumers. This means that each polluter pays for their fair share of the climate pollution they cause. The climate intelligence generated by the OCI Plus helps policymakers, operators, the financial community, and civil society achieve emission reductions with better maintenance, regulations, and lending practices. For more information, please visit our website. RMI is using the OCI Plus and its publicly available data to make emissions visible, create platforms that properly account for emissions, set standards, verify pledges to reduce emissions, certify the industry's emissions, and activate climate markets. With better climate intelligence, we can make better decisions to prevent global temperatures from dangerously rising. To learn more about RMI's ongoing work, please visit our website at rmi.org.
Thanks so much for showing that, Adil.
Yeah.
I'm going to try this one last time. I'm back on the app.
Week. Yeah, I think. Yeah, it is working now.
Fantastic.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Fran.
No, I thank this group for their patience. Can you see my full presentation now?
Yes.
All right, wonderful. Well, hi everyone. My name is Fran Royland. I'm a senior associate at RMI, formerly known as Rocky Mountain Institute, but recently we're just RMI. I'm here to talk about the Oil Climate Index plus gas, or the OCI Plus, which is the intro video that you all just saw. And the title of my talk today is Know Your Oil and Gas with the OCI, Climate Intelligence for the Petroleum Sector. Timely enough, I was going to start with that demo video. Thanks so much to Adil for filling in. Hopefully that gave everyone a good sense of just a 30,000-foot overview of this work, the motivations for creating it, how the web tool, just sort of the look and feel of the web tool, and some of the key findings. I will dive into the models that underpin that data web tool and talk about the methodology. Then I'll move into some of the key findings, specifically around looking at different emissions footprints broken out by resource type. So how different types of oil and gases and the emissions that, the factors that drive their either low or high emissions, and what that means for different policy levers that should be pulled as reduction mechanisms. I will attempt to visit the tool, hopefully no more technical difficulties there, and show some of the key functionalities. and then wrap up with a mention of some of our current users, next steps, and potential areas of collaboration with some of these stakeholders here. Skip right through that. So this was actually part of the video. Deborah Gordon, our senior principal, was holding up a couple of these vials, but I like to show the picture because I think that it just gives a striking visual image of the differences between different types of oils. These all come from different areas in North America, not just by their color and their texture and their consistency, but also their physical properties, their chemical properties, how they're operated and managed vary quite widely from one resource to the next. And this has implications for their climate footprints as well. One of the issues that we see today in policy or in other arenas is that when someone is accounting for life cycle emissions intensity from an oil or gas, they often use just sort of a fixed emissions intensity. But when we have modeled 135 different oil and gas resources from around the globe, we see that there's quite a large range in intensity. So on the left, you can see it's on the gas side. This is anywhere from about 200 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per barrel of oil equivalent, upwards of 5 times that. And so there's really no one single number that can represent all oil and gas resources. This schematic starts to show kind of how the model is put together. So we refer to the OCI Plus as this entire thing put together, but really it's 3 submodels that combine to give us the life cycle assessment. So the 3 models are called OPG, Prelim, and OPEM. OPG is the oil production greenhouse gas estimator. It is developed by our collaborators at Stanford, and that's really the upstream model. So this is extraction, production, all the way through initial processing stages. Prelim is our refining and petrochemical model, so that we call that our midstream model for the oil streams that flow from OPG into Prelim. And the OPEM model is our end use and refined product transport model. So stringing them all together, you have the OCI in its totality. As far as inputs to the models, this version of the OCI Plus was built entirely on publicly reported data. So everything from the production volumes to details about their API gravity, their locations, their ages, what operational practices are used, fracking or not fracked, for example, is all sourced from academic, government, or other publicly available technical resources. We also integrate satellite data in the form of flaring estimates. So these are derived by our collaborators at the Colorado School of Mines, and they're based off of the NOAA satellite. This is just another way of looking at how the OCI models the span or each segment of oil and gas supply chains, starting at the production sites on the left. The OPG model starts there and picks it up all the way through the point of refining in the case of oil, which we switched to the Prelim model. And then finally, the OPEM model does the refined product transport and in use. I guess I forgot to mention one thing that's important about these models is that they are all open source, peer reviewed, and bottom up process engineering based models. So moving into some of the key findings from this work, and this really harkens back to the title of this talk, which is why it's important to know your oil and gas, because we see that oil and gas resource emissions differ widely, both within each type of category of resource and across all categories. So if we see here in this chart on the left-hand side, starting with dry gas at the top, which is a gas resource that has very little condensate or other liquids produced. It's methane dominated in its makeup and composition. They're among, they have the potential to be among the lowest emissions intensity of all resources. But that said, even within that category of dry gas, you can see anywhere, you could see upwards of 2 to 3x in range, just depending on the specific characteristics of that resource. On the other hand, jumping down to the bottom of this chart, extra heavy oil. So these are highly viscous, really low API gravity oils that often have a lot of, that require special inputs, enhanced oil recovery techniques to lift them out of the ground, whether that's steam, water injection, gas injection. So they tend just as a default to be, they have a higher minimum emissions intensity, but can, in the worst case scenarios, be on the upper range of the spectrum. And I'm seeing good questions come in through the chat. I'm just going to go ahead and circle back to those at the end, if that's okay. It's pretty tough to talk about oil and gas these days without talking about methane. We take an intense focus on methane in our research on our team. The statistic on the left says on average 1/2 of emissions totals. So of our global 130 fields that we modeled, on average, methane is responsible for about half of the intensity the emissions intensity that's resulting from our estimates. And this is due to methane leakage that's occurring at the production stages and in transport. So really predominantly in gas pipeline leakage there. The graph on the right shows methane's contribution, just more of a visual representation of the contribution to emissions intensity. So blue, if you take sort of each individual small rectangle to be one resource modeled, there would be 135 across the bottom. You can see that the blue, which is the methane, makes up a varying amount of the upstream emissions intensity. So in several cases, methane is well over half of the total height of the bar, but there are some cases where methane isn't the main driver. There may be an example such as an acid gas, which is really CO2 dominated. And so it's really not a methane story there. It's other types of reduction levers that need to be focused on. Great, yeah, so this is another feature of the OCI, which we think is really cool. And this is looking at different mitigation mechanisms that can be pulled and showing the reduction potential depending on the type of resource we're talking about. So this slide here is looking at light oils and various gases. So these are, light oils will be pretty high API gravity. There's a healthy mix of oil, sort of light liquids, condensates that are being produced, and gases. And if we look at sort of the black numbers in bold here, there's many actually reduction levers that can contribute, not insignificant reductions to their overall intensity. So anywhere from about a quarter to upwards of this 43%. So on average, about a third of emissions intensity can be reduced by some of these pretty well-known reduction mechanisms. I can talk about flare volume just as an example, because that will come up later on the map and in some of our future planned work. But there are some oil operations around the globe that are producing a good amount of both oil and gas, but for whatever reason, maybe it's a connection to market issue or just a not ideal practice, but excess gas is just being flared off in large volumes instead of finding a more productive end use. But when in this scenario, we're able to model significant reductions, upwards of 40% of its overall intensity can be reduced if that flaring is reduced or done away with as a practice. This is a different slate of resources. So this one's more focusing on good mechanisms that can be applied for heavy and watery oils. These are types of resources that often require additional inputs like steam to be injected into the ground to kind of coax out the oil. And often fossil fuels are burned to generate that steam. But that top scenario is modeling an application of solar renewables and using solar steam or solar as the source of the power to generate steam. and showing what a significant reduction in emissions intensity that can have. All right, I'm gonna attempt to switch over to the tool itself and poke around a little bit. Hopefully this works. Are you seeing a gray map with a bunch of bubbles?
Yeah, it is working. We see that.
Fantastic. So this is, I just jumped straight to the map page here. This is the OCI itself. Each of these gray bubbles represents one of the resources we modeled in this version of the release. You can see how they span pretty much worldwide. The size of the bubble is proportional to the estimated emissions intensity. So the bigger the bubble, the larger the overall intensity. And you can hover over or click over, these bubbles, and it'll pop up with that intensity number. And I won't do this right now, but you can hit this view details button and it'll jump you over to a page that gives you the breakdown of all of the inputs we used to model this specific resource, its age, how its intensity breaks down over those different upstream, midstream, and downstream segments. Lots of good stuff there. With this group, I did want to show a couple more things on this map page specifically. I did mention flaring volume and how that was an input to our model and one of the significant emissions reduction levers that we can target. By toggling this on, we're showing where those flaring sites are occurring throughout the world. The darker or the closer to red, the more intense the flaring, or the higher the volume of gas that's being flared. And so what we do is overlay our regions, or our fields that we're modeling, and sort of aggregate the flaring that's occurring within those sites, and that becomes one of the inputs. We are planning to develop lots of further work here. This will come up in my last slide, but we really want to deepen our focus on on flaring, especially given that it's also an environmental justice. It's extremely important in the environmental justice community, given how often health pollutants or health concerning pollutants are being co-emitted at flaring sites. So our plan is to do a deeper dive with this flaring data, overlay it with demographic information and other sorts to develop a ranking system for which flares should really be targeted for priority in terms of mitigation. Also on this page, we have a methane map and also the ability to switch in size the bubbles, compare the bubbles by their methane intensity only, not instead of their overall emissions intensity. This map is depicting a visual representation of the GFEI, I believe it stands for the Global Fossil Fuel Emissions Inventory, that was developed by T.S. Scarpelli at Harvard, or one of our collaborators. And just to be clear here, this is, that emissions inventory, that methane inventory is not an input to our models currently, but we really like to sort of co-overlay these because it shows where, for example, inventory-based methane inventories, where methane inventories are showing hotspots and lighting up different corners of the world, and how that overlays with some of our highest methane emitting fields. And I also want to just point out here that we're really excited about integrating more flyover, remotely sensed methane data as those become available from new satellite missions that are planning to go up in the next 1 to 2 years with MethaneSat and Carbon Mapper. So we plan to integrate those data both in the map and in our modeling work. To some degree, we already are. We've integrated some initial Tropomi and Sentinel-based assessments of ultra-emitting methane in places like the Middle East, over Russian pipelines, and over the Permian. So those known areas of ultra-emitting or super high methane-emitting events are making their way into our model results. But we look forward to doing that increasingly over the next year or two. I won't spend long on the total emissions page, but this is in this area of the site, you're able to sort of sort and disaggregate, slice and dice based off of region, based off of oil or gas, how it's produced. And this is really sizing boxes based off of total emissions, so an absolute basis. The next tab I'll show over is really on an intensity basis. But if, for example, if I just click into the light oil category, it will size the boxes according to total emissions. Not too surprising to see Permian, Texas is among the largest on an absolute scale. Supply chain tab, this is the last one I'll preview for now. But there's also a lot going on here. Each of these individual bars represent one of the oil or gases we modeled. So scrolling down, you'll see that this would be the 135 number I keep citing. The greens are the oils, and the yellow/orange gray are the gases. And the shading within the bar corresponds to the breakdown of up, mid, and downstream. So if you hover over an individual bar, it'll give you the total emissions intensity and the breakdown according to the segments. The default for this page is to use a 20-year global warming potential. And we think this is a really policy relevant time frame to highlight the near-term potency of methane. Oh, getting some sound from somebody. We can see how by toggling to the 100-year, the ranking of the oils and gases really shifts pretty dramatically. More green bars, so more oils tend to rise to the top when you're considering that time scale. But because gases tend to have more methane leakage associated with them, it's not too surprising that in the 20-year view of things, you see more of those gray, yellow, and orange float near the top. This also speaks to how, it's really a different set of resources that are problematic from a climate perspective when you're considering different timescales. And I think, considering near-term climate targets, it's very important to be thinking about eliminating the methane impacts from some of these high-emitting resources. I will also just highlight on this page, you can sort the resources by diving in on a specific region or country, examining just an individual type of resource, and other ways of slicing and dicing this data on this tab. Given time and just how I don't want to linger too long on this, but there are other cool tabs that I'll send around the link to this site, and hopefully you'll have the chance to check this out afterwards. I'm going to jump back to the slides though and wrap up with two more.
Can you turn on the light too?
I'm back. Okay, so this is speaking to who's using this OCI Plus right now, and it's a really fun position to be in, interacting with a lot of different stakeholders. People come to us from the public, private, nonprofit sector, really interested in this tool for a number of different reasons. On the right there, this is just a sample of the types of organizations that we interact with through this work. Climate Trace is a coalition that is aiming to produce an anthropogenic, emissions inventory for all sectors. And so we use the intelligence from the OCI intelligence to provide oil and gas sector emissions estimates and contribute it to their inventory. You can also see that there's a number of government or institutions on here. California Air Resources Board uses OPG, so that upstream model, to assess the intensity of oils that are both produced in the state of California and that are imported. Just a bit further down the list, industry groups have used this work to reconcile their corporate emissions against, the modeled emissions against their corporate assessments of their own performance. I would say there's definitely been an uptick also in interest from the financial and investment community, wanting to assess the climate risks associated with the assets in their portfolio. And then finally, more towards the bottom, we interact frequently with journalists and media who are often use this as more of a storytelling and educational tool, just given how I would say, sort of rare these messages around oil and gas heterogeneity and resource differentiation are, but we really think this is an up and coming topic given the trajectory of global interests. My final slide here is just talking about what's up next and potential areas of collaboration with NASA CMS community, which has been a really great thing to be a part of for a couple of years now. The first thing that's ongoing right now is Pythonifying. I love someone introduced me to that verb recently. Pythonifying the upstream and midstream models. Traditionally, OpG and Prelim have been Excel-based models, and this has provided some limitations in our ability to really scale this work and model hundreds and hundreds of global resources in time series. So converting those over, converting our data infrastructure to make that more easier. That's related to the second bullet, which is to increase the number of assets modeled to over 500 fields in 90 plus countries. So after accomplishing that, we hope to be modeling around 2/3 of all global oil and gas production. The 135 that we're at in this current version are about half. So you can see that in covering those 135, we've already hit a lot of the big ones, but we really plan to up this to well over 500 soon and contribute that data, as I mentioned on the last slide, to Climate Trace. We're really big on trying to incorporate more methane data from remote sensing, as I mentioned when I was showing that tool from Carbon Mapper and other remote sensing initiatives that can spot point source or that can spot super emission methane and make sure that those are being accounted for in our estimation of these resources. I also mentioned a deepened focus on flaring and the creation of a flare mitigation index that includes environmental justice indicators. So that will be another project that our team is undertaking in the next 6 months to a year. The second to last bullet is really a new subject that has come up, but I thought it may be worth raising with this group, given their knowledge of different land data products and potential satellite-derived insights that can help there. What we want to do, what we're curious about, is integrating more land carbon assessments or metrics into this work. So at present, OpG, the upstream model, does account for, in some ways, emissions that would stem from like land clearing or regular disruption of soil to make way for oil and gas production. But we think that there's a lot more to be had there in terms of looking at the locations of all of these fields and the nature of the land that's being disrupted. Oftentimes oil and gas may be co-located in really vulnerable areas, whether it's up near the Arctic around the methane hydrates, out in Siberia, or in by contrast in rainforest or really other carbon-rich territories near the equator, that sort of thing. So really just getting initial thoughts there, but potential for work there for us in the future. And then the last bullet is just integrating more economic assessments as a part of this. So I didn't point it out, but I think it was a part of the video that we've already integrated a simple feature that allows users to look at the effect of a carbon price or a methane price and how that would be, if levied, how that would be sort of applied across different segments, upstream, midstream, and downstream, all sort of paying their fair share, so to speak, of where the emissions are stemming from. But I think there's a lot of other areas that we could merge in economic and finance data with this work. And that's those are my slides for the day. Yeah, thanks so much. And at this point, I will, Adil, could you read out some of those questions in chat?
Definitely. Thank you, Fran. I think it was great presentation. The timing was perfect. We have 15 minutes for Q&A and discussion, and we already have 2 questions. If you have questions, you can post them there on the chat box. I'll go over them, or we'll have time to unmute yourself and make your question or comment to Fran or to the group. So Mark Vincent asked at the beginning, and this is a question that I always have had also, general question, like why the reason for switching from Rocky Mountain Institute to RMI?
Yeah. No, this is a funny thing, and I'm not super connected to our branding and marketing team, but um, there were a couple of reasons. I think one of the biggest ones is RMI is really thinking about its roots sort of as this very organic, kind of out there organization, really forward thinking that started in the Rocky Mountains out in Basalt Carbondale, Colorado. It's really expanded in several decades to be more of a global organization. So I think there was this feeling that identifying too closely with Rocky Mountains wasn't really in capturing the work that we do all the way from India to China to Eastern United States, for example. So just a slight detachment from the Rocky Mountain part of that, and just using the RMI acronym. Hopefully that helps a little bit.
It does, and it makes sense. And Nisa, she asked two questions. First, what causes the huge variability within the categories? Is it technology? And I think that was just the start of the presentation.
Yeah, I'll go back. Oh, maybe I won't. Oh, yeah. So maybe around this slide. Yes, gosh, so there can be, technology is certainly part of it. I would say there are, and sorry, was the question specifically variability within any given type of resource or just general variability?
What there is in the question is within the categories. I
Within
don't
the
know
categories.
if Nisa, you want to unmute yourself and maybe clarify.
Hey, yeah. So I was talking about like in internal, like dry gas wise, it's so like the extremes are really extreme. So
No, yeah, it's a great question. So, dry gas is a great example. So, thinking of two resources that would be otherwise nearly identical in terms of their gas composition. So they have similar makeup of methane, H2S, CO2, for example. Maybe they're similarly aged, similar like depths, layers of rock. All things taken equal, there can still be really large operational practices. This speaks somewhat to the flaring map. If you look at a dry gas, for example, maybe in the Marcellus area in eastern United States, if it's really tightly managed, they have good, let's say, regular leak detection practices, not a lot of flaring, good access to gas markets. We would see potentially much lower overall emissions there compared to maybe, for example, a dry gas in near the Yamals or somewhere in Russia, where from satellite data we're seeing several large leaks happen pretty regularly, like large enough to be spotted by an instrument like Tropomi. So we try to factor in, you know, things like resource specific characteristics, like those age, those things that would be sort of their I would say their resume or their identifiers. But then really what's happening in practice, how are the operators managing this, and to your point, like what technologies are available to them to help keep emissions low. So those would be some of the reasons we might see really wide variability.
Thank you, Fran. And she follows up with a question that I think is very important. And I imagine, I don't know, like if, I imagine one of the data sets that you were using was from Chris Elvidge that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. So Nisa asks, like, which instruments and data sets are you incorporating from peers?
Yeah, so this is we work directly with Elvidge's team at Payne Institute School of Mine to generate that flaring map, which I showed on the tool. I believe it's their night fire product. We use right now we're using the annual summation of global flaring. So it's just individual sites around the world. Oh yeah, it looks like the deal's got it potentially posted in the link there, but it's gas volume, total gas volumes on an annual basis by site. And so since we're modeling these resources on an annual basis, we will sum the flares on an annual basis as well and incorporate that into the modeling.
Thank you, Fran. And Nisa, I added the link to the archive dataset from that global gas flare survey that is from Chris Elvish. That was a project that was partially funded by CMS. Mark asked, why was the major Russian production near Crimea, but the major flaring in central Russia? So that you have.
I think so.
Yeah.
Maybe I should go to the tool for that question. He's noting maybe an area of high flaring that we weren't modeling. Mark, I don't know if you want to come off and just clarify.
Yeah, it's on your plot. I was thinking maybe the answer to the question is that the actual extraction is in central Russia, but they do the refining in Crimea.
Got it. Sorry, you cut out a little bit there. But yeah, so this flaring, let me think. This flaring data, you're right that the flaring data set does have both what they call upstream and downstream flaring, so flaring from refineries and flaring from upstream. For this portion of the analysis, we only look when we're at least incorporating it into the model. I have to check what's being depicted on the flare map, but we would only factor in the upstream flaring. And it is possible that there are, I mean, I think we have maybe 10 or so fields modeled in Russia out of, hundreds, if not probably thousands. So hopefully, I mean, maybe to your point, we'll have better coverage in a given region with this new update of 500 to 600 fields that we're hoping to cover. I don't know if that quite got to your question. It may also have been I had the map on the most zoomed out portion, but if you zoom in, it may be a little bit easier to see exactly where the pin is dropped for the field that we've modeled.
Yeah, I was kind of interested in the geopolitical aspects of it all.
No, yes, understood.
Great. Yeah, thank you for that, Fran. We have a question from Bar Crows, but before that, we still have like 8 minutes. I want to open it. If someone has any questions, comments that they want to unmute yourself and address directly Fran or the group, we have time for that now. If not, we can go to Bart's question. Bart used to work at California Air Resources Board, and this is a very good question, Fran. Do you think strong regulatory structures are necessary, or can highlighting methane leaks to producers or national governments or the press facilitate methane reductions?
This is a fantastic question. And actually, before I was at RMI, I was at IEA. I don't remember if I mentioned that at the beginning, the International Energy Agency. And part of my work there was focused specifically on different types of regulatory structures. And as you point out, I would say, broadly speaking, right now we see there's a limited set of countries, apart from those who have signed the Global Methane Pledge, which I think is a recent sort of announcement of ambition by a lot of countries. But as far as those who have, oil and gas methane specific regulation on the books, there's just not that many. There's not as many examples. There's several in North America, Canadian states. Obviously, Mexico has been doing a lot recently. California being a leading example. Norway has got a methane-specific tax that they levy on leaks. So my work there was looking at just the breadth of different types of regulations that can be applied and really trying to think outside of the box. To your point, I don't think it's going to be possible or expected that strong regulatory, well-enforced mechanisms will apply super well or evenly throughout the world. So I do think it really is going to take kind of an all angles approach. I do, even in the past 1 to 2 years or so, the use of satellites, GHGSat in tandem with TRPOMI and other instruments, just making headlines very regularly about large methane sources that are being spotted from all corners is really inciting this question of what can be done there. What, if not through regulation, what are some of those other sort of mechanisms? And one that I'm particularly excited about is potentially more of a direct communication lines in with industries, especially national oil companies, which definitely cannot be ignored because they dominate production in large portions of the world, South America, in the Middle East, and in Africa. So there is, I think, going to be more mechanisms potentially along the lines of an alert system or leak detection systems that are connecting more directly into industry and not expecting that these sort of complicated regulatory structures to necessarily be stood up everywhere. But I think that, you know, even those producers, given the sort of the recognition that, well, you know, cleaner or, you know, less methane emitting gas is going to be highly valued throughout the world. The more we sort of close in on this 2030 deadline, decisive decade, I think that hopefully it will spur this sort of sense of competition to prove that you're able to produce more cleanly than your neighbor, and we'll have to go more that direction.
Thank you, Fran. That was great feedback. Do we have any other questions from the group? You can unmute yourself, anyone? We have maybe time for one more. Thank you, Guillaume. Okay, if we don't have any other questions, comments, I think it's a good time to wrap up. I want to thank again, Fran, for the time, for showing us this the updated tool. We'll make the recording of this talk available on the CMS website and the slides. And I just want to let you know that we're gonna start doing hybrid seminars going forward. So later on this month, we're gonna have the first in-person seminar at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center in maybe like in 2 years since the start of the pandemic. So we'll always have a remote connection available for all of those of you that are throughout, you know, the US and outside the US. So I'll be sending more information about that. And if you have any questions regarding what we talk about today or future events, just let me know. You can send me an email. And thank you again. And thank you, Fran, for your time and for the great presentation.
Thanks, Adil, and thanks for staying calm and the technology at the jumble, but we got it figured out.
We have, after 2 years, yeah, we know how to like deal with those. So it was great. It's great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.